So, whatever happened to that super cool and, more importantly, super fun 1984 sci-fi flick, The Last Starfighter? Let's find out. Movies, music, and monsters. Hey guys, Dan Monroe here, talking about movies, music, and monsters. Now, right off the bat, I'd like to thank Squarespace for once again sponsoring this video, but more on that later. Hey guys, real quick. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. I don't think YouTube creators thank their audience enough, because without you, there would be none of this. So once again, my friends, thank you. Oh, it's gonna be a sparkling day. Just sparkling. The Last Starfighter, definitely one of my all-time favorite childhood sci-fi adventure films that, like most of you, I've probably seen 1,000 times if I've seen it once. For those of you who never experienced this delightful little film from the mid-1980s, it's essentially, like Star Wars, another version of the hero's journey where we find Alex Rogan, a brilliant, young, overly motivated teenager living in a small trailer park, dreaming of one day leaving home to experience life beyond the stars. Well, after successfully reaching the highest score possible on a video game called Starfighter, he certainly gets his wish. I'd like to thank Kelly Mark Delcom from Block 4 Studios, Todd Felton, Chris Hebert, Doc at Rogue Synapse for providing a ton of valuable information and photos about this film that I now get to share with all of you guys. Extra special thanks to the incredibly innovative and accomplished director and producer David Fine, who was responsible for producing the 4K Director's Edition of Star Trek the Motion Picture, and he's even responsible for the very first special edition of this film even existing. This film is not only extremely beloved by children and adults of all ages all over the world, but also has a really cool backstory. So grab your favorite 1980s video game console and a bucket of stale popcorn, and let's dive in. The extremely colorful and interesting characters in this film were so freaking cool and, again, in my opinion, 100% expertly cast by director Nick Castle. Kind of a strange tie-in for all you John Carpenter Halloween fans out there. Nick Castle was the guy who played Michael Myers in the original 1978 classic masterpiece, Halloween. Lance Guest was just perfectly cast in this part, who, in another Halloween tie-in just 3 years earlier, appeared with Jamie Lee Curtis in the film Halloween 2, which was actually his first Hollywood movie. This guy also appeared in Neil Simon's I Ought to Be in Pictures, Jaws the Revenge, numerous television appearances, and even starred on Broadway as Johnny Cash in the musical $1 Million Quartet.
I think it was a good idea, and I think it was well directed and well written, and it sort of has the distinction of being this groundbreaker for the old CGI, since that's become such a massive component of movie making nowadays.
This is absolutely beyond bizarre, but back in 2018, it actually happened. Lance Guest appeared on stage at the Theater of Note in Los Angeles in a 2-act comedy stage play based on the Star Wars Holiday Special. Catherine Mary Stewart was just adorable as Alex's girlfriend Maggie. Renowned Hollywood actor Dan O'Herlihy as Grigg was probably one of the greatest casting jobs as I've ever seen, and the star of the film, in my opinion, the lovable, legendary Robert Preston as Centauri.
Well, there's a lot of con in Centauri, and I don't think anyone's ever portrayed an outer space con man yet. You know, it's a license to steal. It's a wonderful way to make a living. And I wish the world could enjoy its job as much as I enjoy mine.
The creators of this film actually based Robert Preston's Centauri character partially on his extremely famous role as Professor Harold Hill from The Music Man. Oh, The Music Man, probably my favorite of all the old-time classic musicals. In fact, I even played Harold Hill in college way back in 19... whatever. Well, we got trouble, my friends. Right here, I say trouble right here in River City. Director Nick Castle called casting Robert Preston as Centauri as, and I quote, one of the greatest castings of any film in the 1980s. Sadly, Robert Preston died of lung cancer at the very young age of only 68 on March 21st, 1987, making this film his final appearance in a Hollywood motion picture. Production began on The Last Starfighter in 1983, mostly shooting at night in Canyon County, California. And get this, the entire film was literally shot in just about only 38 days. This is really kind of interesting. The initial concept of the entire film started with screenwriter Jonathan Batul watching a kid playing video games. Now, the director, Nick Castle, spent a lot of time making sure that the least amount of comparisons between his film and other blockbusters like Star Wars and Close Encounters would occur, and really went out of his way to try to make his movie look just a little bit different. Strange. Originally, the two main characters, Alex and Maggie, were named Skip and Penny. They eventually changed that because those names sounded just a little bit too cartoony for a movie like this. Kind of cool. The translator given to Alex on Rylos was actually just the circuit board of a digital watch. For certain shots of Alex playing the Starfighter game, the screen was removed and colored lights were put inside the console when filming close-ups of Alex himself. Interesting tidbit, the small box-shaped robot that you see after Alex gets his uniform on Rylos was actually a real robot from that time called a Heathkit Hero 1 educational robot, which sold at the time for an astronomical amount of money. I remember it was like $2,500. This film had the very unique distinction of being the first Hollywood film to ever use CGI as a major plot point in a theatrical motion picture, literally replacing all model visual effects with CGI. Many people point to Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan as the very first use of CGI in a Hollywood motion picture, but way back in 1977, there was this little film called, Star Wars, not A New Hope, just Star Wars, that showed CGI images of the Death Star plans at the Rebel base, so there's that. The Gunstar, along with a bunch of other ships, were designed by artist Ron Cobb, who also worked on Conan the Barbarian, Alien, Dark Star, and the original Star Wars. All of the computer-generated graphics for this film were rendered by a company called Digital Productions on a Cray XMP supercomputer, essentially creating like 300 scenes containing over 27 minutes of digital effects for this film. This supercomputer, back in the day, basically had the same power as one of today's Apple smartwatches. Think about that the next time you're watching this film. Digital Productions basically won over the studio by claiming, at the time anyway, that using CGI would cut the cost and time of using traditional special effects literally in half. And yes, you can certainly tell by looking at the film today that this was very early CGI, which had a bit of a video game look to it, but to me, now, that's freaking perfect because it's essentially a movie about a video game. But this was definitely the spark that ignited a change in visual effects forever. interesting thought. Without the efforts of CGI from this film, there definitely would never have been a Pixar animation studio, and there might never have been a Lucasfilm digital department. Meaning there would never have been the Star Wars special editions. Wouldn't that have been nice? But not all of the special effects in the movie were CGI. There was the enormous landing leg, which was used as the physical Gunstar. The Beta unit, before it started looking like Alex, was a practical effect created by makeup artist Lance Anderson, who was responsible in helping to create the amazing makeup effects for the 2001 Planet of the Apes, the 1996 Island of Dr. Moreau, and so many more. We could be here all day. During test screenings, the Beta unit was so popular that Nick Castle, the director, went back and added more scenes of Beta Alex interacting with the community of the trailer park. However, at this point, Lance Guest, who obviously played both Alex and the Beta, had substantially shorter hair than he did when they filmed and was really quite sick. So, for those additional shots of the Beta, Lance Guest was wearing a wig and a ton of makeup just to make him look a little bit healthier. The super cool-looking Star Car was actually a working vehicle based on the general design of a DeLorean built on the chassis of a Volkswagen Beetle, which coincidentally couldn't go more than like 30 miles an hour, and was designed by Ron Cobb and created by the incredible Gene Winfield, who was the guy who created the Shuttlecraft for the original Star Trek television series, as well as a ton of other incredible stuff throughout Hollywood history. I could literally spend a half hour just talking about the genius of Gene Winfield and the cool stuff he created. In fact, in the future, come to think of it, I might just do that. I already did an entire video all about Gene Winfield and the Star Trek Shuttlecraft. Check it out. Link in the description. You know, one thing I always thought was really cool about the digital version of the Star Car was the fact that after it takes off and goes into space, the wheels turn sideways and then pull up into the main body, very similar to the way the DeLorean did it in the Back to the Future movies a couple of years later, and for a very good reason. Ron Cobb designed both the Star Car and the DeLorean time machine for Back to the Future. You know, when I first started out to do this video, I just assumed that there would be a whole ton of great information, like all over the web about this movie, but the reality is, I had to do a lot of deep digging to find out most of this stuff. I mean, wouldn't it have been nice just to have one fantastic website all about The Last Starfighter, all in one place? Well, hey, maybe one of you guys would like to make one. And if you do, you can certainly use this week's sponsor, Squarespace. If you've ever thought about it, you know, having your own website to promote a brand, sell a product, anything really, well, Squarespace is a freaking awesome company to help you do just that. Super quick, super simple. One thing that makes it so easy is a brand new guided design system called Squarespace Blueprint. You can choose from super professional looking layouts, then personalize them to your own needs, automatically optimized for every device. And if you're selling something, it's even easier, with tons of really powerful payment tools where you can accept credit cards, PayPal, Apple Pay, making checkout seamless and simple. You can upload your own video content to your own video library, sell exclusive content like memberships, courses, music, or ebooks, purchase the domain and launch your very own website all in no time, all in one place. It's super simple, super convenient. Simply check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and even better, you can save 10% off your first purchase of a domain or website by visiting squarespace.com/Dan Monroe. And now, back to The Last Starfighter. The musical score by Craig Safan was just fantastic. Super huge sounding recording. In fact, the composer was quoted as saying that he wanted to go even bigger than Star Wars and therefore got himself an enormous orchestra to create that brilliantly large sound, which coincidentally sold like hotcakes when the soundtrack was eventually released. I never really knew this, but apparently a very young Will Wheaton of Star Trek The Next Generation fame actually had a few lines of dialogue in the film that were eventually cut, but he is still visible in the background a few times if you look really, really close. Poor Will Wheaton. Shut up, Wesley. Well, the last Starfighter came and the last Starfighter went, but that certainly wasn't the end of this classic 1984 sci-fi flick. Well, almost, but not quite. We really didn't get a lot of toys from this film, but we did get a couple. In 1984, FASA, which was a sci-fi tabletop game maker, created a game called The Last Starfighter Tunnel Chase. The Galoob toy company created prototypes for a line of action figures, but retailers didn't think the movie would be successful, so that idea was scrapped. There was also a set of Last Starfighter Viewmaster cards. Marvel Comics produced a pretty cool comic book adaptation of the film, which was released the same year as the movie. And yes, we even got the good old-fashioned style plastic lunchbox. Okay, that's all well and good, but what everybody really wanted was an actual Last Starfighter video game. And of course, the Hollywood studio system knew this because they added in the end credits that an actual Last Starfighter arcade game would be produced by Atari, but that never happened because apparently once representatives from the Atari company actually sat down and watched the film, they decided it just wasn't going to be a financial success. Really? A video game featured in a movie about a video game? God. Company representatives. Atari did, however, create home versions of the game, but never actually released it under the Last Starfighter name. It's really kind of cool. The Last Starfighter Atari arcade game development was then later employed to make the graphics for the very first Star Wars arcade game that, believe me, I spent a lot of time playing back in the day. In October 2004, apparently there was an off-Broadway musical adaptation of The Last Starfighter with music and lyrics by Skip Kennan. A musical, I don't know. Maybe? Okay, but what about all those super cool costumes and props from the film? Well, over the years, many of the original costumes, space helmets, and smaller props have traded hands in various auctions, not really going for very much, usually in the $300 to $500 range, but there were, however, a few notable exceptions. Zor's Scepter sold in a Profiles in History auction in 2024 for almost $9,000, and the Grig spacesuit sold in 2018 for $9,600. Remember that super cool scene where Robert Preston has his face off in the Star Car? Well, that mask sold at a prop store auction for just over $8,000. The store location where the Last Starfighter game began this entire movie wasn't a prop or a set at all, but actually a real store, and it's still there today. Here it is. And what about the movie's two biggest props, the Star Car and the actual Starfighter video game prop? Well, let's start with the Star Car. After filming was completed, the vehicle was placed back in studio storage, making a very brief appearance once again on screen in Back to the Future 2, then back to some Hollywood warehouse for years. But now it seems that the car is in France, very close to Paris, currently owned by a French collector, and from the most current pictures I could find, it certainly looks as if this super cool star car is finally in the process of a badly needed restoration. How cool is that? Now, as for the original screen-used Starfighter video prop, man, I did a lot of digging to find out that, unfortunately, I'm afraid that the prop simply no longer exists. Every single rabbit hole I climbed down pointed to the same conclusion, that the prop was literally abandoned and succumbed to nature. But the prop does live on in a very special kind of way. There was a beautiful recreation of the Starfighter video game, which does still exist, made for an exceptional 1999 special called Crossing the Frontier, Making the Last Starfighter, and built by HMS Creative Productions. This gorgeous recreation of the original game has now found a very worthy home with a private collector who truly gives it the love it deserves, and better yet, even turned it into an actual video game. And I also know a lot of you guys have built your own Last Starfighter video games, and that, my friends, is super cool. And, by the way, if anybody out there wants to build their very own Last Starfighter video game console, well, you can. Just check out the website called Rogue Synapse. Everything's right there you could possibly need, so check it out. Link in the description. Okay, but what about all the sequels, remakes, and God help us, reimaginings? Well, for better or for worse, it just hasn't happened. Yet. In February 2008, a production company called GPA Entertainment added a Last Starfighter sequel to its list of upcoming projects, and then nothing happened. Apparently, this sequel idea was still floating around in 2012, with some pretty famous directors sort of paying attention to it, like Seth Rogen and Steven Spielberg, but again, nothing happened. However, in March 2021, English-American screenwriter and author Gary Whitta published on YouTube a sequel concept reel called The Last Starfighters with an S, containing concept art, music, and even an audio clip from the original film by Robert Preston, but nothing at all since that time. Honestly, a remake or sequel is absolutely still possible, and quite frankly, I would love to see that happen. Interesting fact, when Steven Spielberg ended up not remaking this film, he went right on to make Ready Player One. The Last Starfighter was released on VHS way back in 1984, but definitely found its core audience on HBO, which made the film that much more sought after. The film was released on DVD for the first time back in 1999, and finally in glorious high definition for its Blu-ray release in 2009, and just last year in 2023 for its unbelievably stunning 4K Ultra HD release. And for those of you on Facebook, there's an amazing public group called The Last Starfighter with tons of great information and photos all about this film. Check it out. Again, link in the description. Listen, if you've never seen this film, do yourself a favor and take a look. Not only is 2024 the 40th anniversary of the film, but it's just one of those movies where you can sit back, shut off your brain, and have fun. No current day messaging shoved in your face, no social commentary, old-fashioned 1980s good times with a marvelous soundtrack and incredible performance by legendary actors. And if you want to own this video yourself, you can, directly from Arrow Video in both the US and the United Kingdom, in both Blu-ray and gorgeous 4K Ultra HD. Links in the description. The Last Starfighter was not only a super fun movie to watch, but also helped pioneer the origins of computer-generated graphics that would continue to expand almost endlessly in the future, influencing and inspiring such future Hollywood films like Young Sherlock Holmes, Flight of the Navigator, Lost in Space, The Abyss, Jurassic Park, Terminator 2, Judgment Day, Toy Story, and literally just about every single other movie ever made in the last 20 years, but that, my friends, is the topic of another video. I really hope you guys enjoyed that deep dive into The Last Starfighter, and if you did and you like this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing to the channel. I've got a whole bunch of stuff coming up really soon that I know you guys are just gonna dig. And please feel free to stop back anytime as we together continue our conversation on movies, music, and monsters.
Movies, music, and monsters.